Yep.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome back to the last part of this series. Last time I talked a little bit about the scientific conundrum regarding proving the existence of God, but I left out one slide which is talking about the Darwinian theory of evolution. So before I start the program for today, I'll just go through this one slide. And when you get your slides, you can move the slides to the part 2, inshallah. So we are now almost 150 years after, the Darwinian theory when it was uncovered to us. But after 150 years, there is still a dissent. There is no agreement within the scientific community on Darwinian theory. Now, at a populist level among new atheists, the theory has been wrongly used to deny God. And the way it is promoted as if it is an absolute truth, it is immutable, nothing will change. And any opposition or skepticism on Darwinian theory, it is looked at something irrational, dogmatic, and unscientific. That's how they look at it. But this is not true for all scientists, because at a professional level, among renowned practicing scientists in various related fields, they consider the theory as a scientific model of the day, the best what they could have at this time to explain the complexity of life, but they also recognize it is a probabilistic because it is based on probability, samples in some areas, and then deducing from these samples. And also there are many assumptions and there are many unresolved disputes. So new atheists, because they are being defeated in their denial of God by using reason, they have taken Darwinian theory as their main comfort zone. And by misusing science, they actually practicing scientific extremism. In the same way, there are religious extremists who misuse religion. So like extremists, they misuse religion. These new atheists, they misuse science. Now today, Darwinian theory is not challenged on religious grounds only, as much is challenged on scientific grounds, especially by the intelligent design movement. Now, on the right, if you look at the picture closer, you have some of the renowned scientists from top schools, from top universities in the West, in America, in Europe. Some of these universities are Ivy League. And these people, they are very skeptical about Darwinian theory of evolution, and they are calling for careful examination or revisiting the evidence about the theory. So we should not look at Darwinian theory as something acceptable by everyone, and this is and if we take a position against this, it's going to look like weird. No, it's not. This is the mainstream science. If you're interested to look into more of this stuff, in the picture at the bottom, there is a website, discovery.org. I recommend for those who are interested to see a little bit more. Okay, so this brings us to our agenda. We're doing the part 3, and we're going to use our reason to come to the conclusion there is only one God. And also, we will look into some of the positive attributes of God. Now, the idea that there are more than one God could be analyzed by looking at these 3 possibilities. One possibility each natural phenomena in the universe is caused by or an effect of all the assumed God. So we assume like all the gods are cooperating to create and to sustain these different phenomena in the universe. For example, you know, who causes rain, creation of human being, you know, all of these. If we assume that all these gods, they cooperate to produce this together. Another possibility, each natural phenomena or a group of natural phenomena in the universe is caused by or an effect of a particular God. So, you know, one God could be producing, creating, you know, some aspect. You may, some even human beings, maybe some human beings would be created by one God, and other human beings will be created by different. Or if you look at the Greek mythology, they have God of rain, God of sun, God of light, God of love, God of fear. So all these phenomena, if you assume there are different gods who are producing. And the last possibility, all the natural phenomena in the universe are caused by or an effect of one of the assumed gods, and the other gods are acting as administrators of the universe. So these are the only possibility in a practical way. Now, our goal is to use our basic reasoning to show that it is impossible to have any of these three possibilities. Now, so I want to start with the first one, that each natural phenomena in the universe is caused by or an effect of all the assumed gods. Now, last talk, we established that there is a complete dependence of an effect to its first cause. And I use the example of imagination of a rose or a flower in our minds, which is actualized by the will of our souls, or it's been created in our minds by the will of our souls. Now, its existence is sustained in our minds as long as we pay attention to it. And it ceases to exist as soon as we shift our attention elsewhere. Now, of course, our will is limited, and therefore we cannot actualize it externally. But the will of God is perfect and is unlimited, and that's why he can actualize anything externally. Now, therefore, if two or more gods are assumed to create a particular existence, it will imply that each of the assumed gods will externalize a separate occurrence or instance of the same existence, and therefore we will have multiple occurrences or copies of the same object. But in reality, this is not true. We see all objects are unique. For example, if we assume there are three gods and have worked together to create an individual, let's say Charlie Chaplin, it will imply that each of the assumed gods will externalize a separate occurrence or copy of Charlie Chaplin, resulting in three similar versions of Charlie Chaplins. And that's not the case. And therefore, this idea that multiple gods can create the same thing, it's not possible. Now, if we look at the other possibility, each natural phenomena or a group of natural phenomena in the universe is caused by or an effect of a particular god among the assumed gods. So you can have different phenomena by different gods. Now, this assumption, it will imply that, or it will demand to have a heterogeneous order of the universe in such a way that these events are not connected, they are not related, and they are independent from each other. So, you know, the God who produced rain and the God who produced winds and something else, you know, it has to be a heterogeneous order, because in reality, what we see today, the universe displays a homogeneous order such that no event or phenomena is unique or independent from each other. Everything in the universe is interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent. And this relationship pervades all the constituent parts of the universe, which brings about a very comprehensive and all-encompassing organic unit. Now, if you look at all natural phenomena, if you look at photosynthesis, for example, how food is produced, you know, there is a homogeneity. If you look at the food supply chain, if you look at you know, anything that you can look at in the universe, you'll find it is homogeneous. So, for example, in the case of photosynthesis, if one God is responsible for the sun and another God is responsible for something else, how can we get the photosynthesis work together in homogeneity? Therefore, not only that, the past events are linked to the present events, and the present events create grounds for future events. For example, the weather that we see today is the result of the events that have taken place earlier. And what we see today is also creating grounds for future events. So even events which are coexisting parallel to each other, they still share some connection. And therefore, it is not possible to have this kind of possibility. The pictures you have at the top is birds' migration. It's an amazing thing. These birds, where they're living and where they're going, and you know, in this big flock, it's not possible that you will have different controls. The third possibility is assuming that there is one super God who is responsible for creation and for sustenance, for creation, but for sustenance, you have these multiple small gods which administer the universe. Now, this is also not possible because the act of creation and sustenance is the same act by the same agent. The one who creates or gives existence, the creator, is the same one who sustains the existence, or Lord. No independent existence has the means to intervene to an effect unless if granted authority by the creator, the Lord. Therefore, none of the gods who are assumed to have administrative role can be considered as Lord, because the true meaning of a Lord is the one who can freely and independently intervene in the creature's existence and sustenance. Although the creator may bestow special powers to his creations, as in the case of Prophet Isa alayhi salam, who brought to life dead persons, but his action is not considered as independent intervention because it was sanctioned by God. Same thing with the angels. You know, they are responsible to bring life to a fetus and to take life from a human being, but these are sanctioned by God, so they are not lords, they are not independent. Therefore, all these three possibilities are not there, are not possible. Now, I want to clarify one thing. The oneness of God is not arithmetical, so to speak, which means that we cannot even talk about another God or two gods or multiple gods without being absurd, not only in theological terms, but also through reason, as we truly now understand the real meaning of absolute being. Now, an example to drive this idea home of non-arithmetical understanding of Tawheed, if you think of the concept of whiteness in color, for example, just pure whiteness as such, not whiteness as in white mixed with other shades, or some percentage of white, or as in a white car, or white paper, or white clothes, or white objects, just pure whiteness as such, then there is only one and unique such concept. And this is how the concept of absolute being is, the concept of God is such a unique concept. So anyone who comes and talks about two gods or three gods or multiple gods or God in the heaven and God on earth, these are very absurd ideas, because the idea of God is only one: the first cause, the uncaused cause. That's the only one. Okay, so that's cover the proof for the oneness of God using very basic reasoning. So let's look at the attributes of God. Now, it is not sufficient to merely know that God exists, because atheists may conceive of him as cosmic energy or matter. Therefore, we need to prove that God has life, has power, has knowledge, has wisdom. Now, since these concepts are also used for describing creatures, because we can say human being also has life, has power, has knowledge, has wisdom. So it is their ontological perfection and unboundedness that apply to God. We have to understand this. Now, the ultimate perfection of these ontological, perfections and unboundedness must then be within the first cause, God, that has bestowed existence and perfections to all his creatures. God must have full possession of all perfection that are in creation, but without any bounds or limitation. Why is that? Very simple argument. Since it is not possible that the giver of life is void of it, or the giver of power, knowledge, and wisdom is himself helpless, ignorant, and unwise. And therefore, if you just look at human being, whatever these attributes that we have, the attribute of life, the attribute of power, knowledge, and wisdom, and mercy, and all these attributes that we have, God must have them in perfection. Otherwise, it's not possible. So the existence of these perfections in the creatures indicate the presence of perfection within the Creator. Now, I'm not going to do all the attributes, but I'm just going to sample so that we understand that we could use reason to arrive to the right conclusion. And therefore, I'm going to try to do life, power, and knowledge. So let's look at God's attribute of life. The concept of life or living is used for defining two groups of creatures. You can find life in vegetation, in plants, and we characterize it by growth. We talked about it last time. And also we can find in humans and in animals life as well, which is characterized by the possession of consciousness and will. Therefore, the first meaning of life, which is characterized by growth, it cannot be associated with God. Why? Because it is limited, very imperfect, and as vegetation, they require external factors for development and growth. And therefore, we have already talked about the negational attributes of God, and therefore this one, as it applies to vegetation, we cannot associate it with God. But the second meaning of life that is characterized by consciousness and will, this is, we can associate, but we associate it with the perfection of it. So although it comprises of limitation and defects as applicable to us, but it could be applicable to God, but with the consideration of being perfect and unlimited. So although life is related with the living of material creatures, in reality, it is the essential characteristic of non-material entity, the spirit or the soul that we have in us. So the spirit and the soul has been hosted in the material body that we have. When we say we are living, many people, they think of us as a material body, but actually life is an attribute of non-materiality. So, for example, the human body, which is material, is regarded as living, but is due to the effect of the spirit or the soul in it. And therefore, in other words, application of the attribute of life to the material existence is accidental. Just as progression or growth is essential for the material existence, life is essential for non-material existence. And therefore, all of non-material existence have the essential attribute of life, as the essence of God is non-material, which we have proven in the previous talk. Therefore, God must have life as his attributes of essence. Okay, so here, first of all, we have said, since a human being has life, God must have life in its perfection. And we also were saying that the life itself is an attribute not of a material, is an attribute of non-material. And because the essence of God is non-material, therefore he must have life as an attribute. Now let's look at the attributes of knowledge. There are many ways to prove God's knowledge, and the three ways I'm going to cite here. Number one, since knowledge exists within the creatures, verily the ultimate perfect form of it and unbounded must exist with the Creator. So it's a continuation of already the assumption of the premise that we have established in the earlier argument. The second way to look at it, God's knowledge can be proven through the argument of complexity, the orderliness, intelligence, perfection, and purposefulness of the universe, because the manifestation of this complex, orderly, perfect, intelligent, and purposeful universe has clear indication of a precise and perfect knowledgeable creator. Or any form, you know, if you look at any form of arts, is a sign of wisdom, taste, and knowledge of the qualification of the artists. If you look at an intellectual book, if you read a book, you reflect on the author, the knowledge and the intellectual power of the author. If you read eloquent poetry, the same. And therefore, for us, by just reading the universe, by looking at the universe, we can reflect on the Creator, his knowledge. The third way is based on speculative philosophy that establishes the principle that every non-material existence has self-contained knowledge. So non-material existence, not only it has attribute of life, but it also has attribute of self-contained knowledge. Now, the last one, if we look at the God's attributes of power, when an agent produces an action, voluntary, with an intention and free will of its own, it is said to have the power or qudra of performing the act. Now, the level of power is dependent upon the level of perfection of an existence. So, for example, an existence with infinite perfection will have infinite power. Therefore, God is the possessor of all perfections, already proven in the previous argument. He must possess infinite power, meaning he's able to do anything. Now, atheists sometimes, they try to mock people of religion, and they bring to the table tricky and absurd questions related to God's power. For example, sometimes they ask you, and I remember I've been asked this question when I was at the center some time ago, can God throw you out of his kingdom? Or can God create another God? Now, we should be able to respond to this kind of absurd question. For God to throw you out of his kingdom, you assume there is something outside his kingdom, but there is nothing outside his kingdom to throw you out to. And if you say, can God create another God? The fact that you're talking about create, because God is not created. God is a necessary existence, and he doesn't have a cause. And therefore, these questions are absurd. You can also find this with the Christians when they want to justify the idea of God incarnated to the world as Jesus. They use the basis that God can do anything. And we need to counter that, because we say God's voluntary action must be possible to actualize and does not defy logic, because he has given us the logic, and therefore it has to work with the logic. And God must have the desire to actualize it as well. So a thing that is essentially impossible or necessarily absurd will not have relevance with the attribute of power. So the Quran, it says God has power over all things. However, we must be mindful certain points. While God possesses the power to perform anything, it doesn't mean that he will have to perform everything. But whatever God intends to perform, he will perform, because he has that ability, the power to perform. God is all-wise, and therefore he will not perform an act which is unwise. So if somebody asks you a question whether God can perform something that is unwise, and we say, no, God is all-wise and he will not perform an act that is unwise. Now, since power includes the quality of free will, and since God has infinite power, it also implies that God has perfect free will, which is uninfluenced by anything. So this is a bonus, argument. We were targeting to prove attribute of power, but also we are able to argue about, or we prove about, the attribute of God's will. Okay, so this concludes our basic proof, okay, basic reasoning to reason out that there is only oneness of God, the Tawheed, and God has attributes, has positive attributes, and we have shown the attributes of life, knowledge, power, and will. I want to use the rest of the session, the next half an hour, to discuss or to respond to this question of evil and suffering, because this is one of the big things with atheists. Probably this is one of their strongest arguments, but it's not because it is a positive argument. It's just because they have ignorance about this area with respect to the divine justice. So let's look at this issue of evil and suffering. Now, atheists have taken very extreme, negative, and offensive view towards God and religion when it comes to dealing with the issue of evil and suffering in the world. Some atheists, they may have valid and genuine concern for the presence of evil and human suffering in this world, but they fail to understand the divine wisdom for allowing some evil and suffering to take place, especially from the Islamic viewpoint of divine justice. So this is the problem. The problem is we also, as Muslims, we recognize this suffering and this evil in the world, but we don't use this as a way to justify non-existence of God, but we try to understand it from the viewpoint of divine justice. And we may not have the perfect understanding of the divine justice because of our limited knowledge, but nevertheless, God has explained to some extent, and we also keep searching to try to understand better. Now, atheists, this is their argument. They argue that the existence of a powerful and merciful God, as the people of religion want them to believe, is incompatible with the existence of evil and suffering in the world. If God is merciful, and if then he should want the evil and suffering to stop. And if God is powerful, then he should be able to stop it. However, since there is plenty of evil and suffering in the world, it means that either he is not powerful, or he is not merciful, or he lacks both mercy and power, or simply he does not exist. And this is how atheists argue the non-existence of God through the argument of evil and suffering. Now, the atheist evil and suffering argument is based on two false assumptions. They assume that the nature of God consists only of these two attributes of power and mercy, and they ignore all other attributes of God, such as the divine wisdom that will enable them to understand God's actions better. So what is lacking with them? They lack ability to understand. They lack the knowledge to understand God's action. Now, they also assume that God has not provided us with reason for allowing evil and suffering in the world and tools to cope with these difficulties. Like many of atheists' strong sentiments against God and religion, they always argue from the standpoint of ignorance, and they are not very much interested to learn as well. So they are ignorant because they're ignorant about God, the nature of God. They're ignorant about religion. They're ignorant even about how religion explains to us about this universe and how it operates. Because if they have this knowledge, then they will understand evil and suffering in the world better. So just because one cannot access the divine wisdom on the issue of evil and suffering, it does not mean that there isn't one. Now, the problem of evil and suffering in the world, it has become the atheist main weapon to challenge religion, and Islam in particular. Now, a lack of adequate theistic arguments to explain it properly seems to provide at first glance a reason for atheism. That's why we need to articulate this issue in a better way. Now, let's look at what is evil, or shar, as it is referred in the Islamic text. Evil is classified in Islamic tradition as either moral or natural. Now, moral evil refers to man-made like acts of violence, wars, human trafficking, torture, rapes, and all of these, genocide, all these kind of things. These are moral evil and we cannot attribute this to God. We cannot blame God when these kind of evil takes place. They don't prove non-existence of God. They prove the existence of free will in the human beings. But also we have natural evil, which refers to the occurrences of evil brought about by natural laws, such as diseases, pandemics, like what we have today, COVID-19, hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, even socio-economic deficiencies like poverty, ignorance. Now, making sense of the problem of evil is more difficult for atheists because of their rejection of the idea of objective morality. That is, to claim that an action is objectively or factually, with no emotions, evil, it requires first a factual standard of what is good. You cannot say something evil if you have not set the standard of what is not evil. And for theists, it's easy because God provides that standard. But for atheists, they deny God, and therefore they don't have standard for goodness. And therefore it is even difficult for them to discuss evil. Now, the emphasis on God's knowledge and wisdom cannot be overlooked when discussing evil in any of its forms, as one finds when we study the Quran. In the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam and Al-Khidr, for example, is a very good example of what this appears to be acts of evil by Al-Khidr, sinking a boat or killing a boy, which were problematic for Prophet Musa alayhi salam, as both his knowledge and wisdom in that scenario are limited. So Al-Khidr has more knowledge, he was given more knowledge by Allah, and therefore he has wisdom, and therefore these acts, he could understand the meaning of these acts, why it's happened. Therefore, it appears to Sayyidina Musa as being evil, but in reality, they were not evil. So Prophet Musa questions Al-Khidr's evil actions, and he explained that the source of his knowledge about these matters was from God. So Prophet Musa's patience was tested until after 3 seemingly acts of evil, and then it was explained to him the wisdom behind the actions, and it was concluded that I will inform you the interpretation of that which you could not have patience. And this is exactly what is happening with atheists, because they lack the knowledge and therefore they don't have patience. They keep accusing, accusing God, accusing religion of all these evil things, but actually they just don't have the knowledge. So the justification for each of the 3 acts clarify that ultimately these actions were not actually evil. They were not shar, but were in fact good acts, khair. And what is interesting is khair and shar, they coexist in this universe. We have to accept that. From khair, you can get shar, and from shar, you can get khair. They coexist. These are not separate things. They are like together. So if one reflects on the example of how parents deal with their children when the children desire something harmful, the parents' prohibition of such a harmful thing may be considered painful and evil by the child. However, the parents are clearly protective of the child's interest or the child's welfare due to their knowledge and wisdom, because the child doesn't have the knowledge and wisdom. So, but their acts of benevolence may be interpreted by the child as evil and suffering due to their limitation in the child's knowledge and wisdom. And this is exactly a similar scenario. If such significant disparities are commonly observed among human beings, then one must wonder just how gigantic a disparity exists in knowledge and wisdom between human beings and the Creator. So this is an area that needs a lot of covering. Now, atheists, they argue, if God exists, why can't he create a better world? Now, from theological standpoint, Muslim scholars view that absolute evil does not exist. God has not created anything that is absolute evil. What exists in this world is a relative evil. You know, something may have some benefits and may have some disadvantages as well, which occurs with God's knowledge, wisdom, and with his permission, and for a vast range of morally justifiable possibilities. So, can God create a better world? Certainly, yes, it's possible for God to create a world in which evil and suffering does not exist, such as Jannah, paradise. He has already explained to us in the Quran. In Jannah, there is no evil, there's no suffering, there's no pain. And certainly, it's possible for God to create infallible creatures without free will, such as angels. Because he says in the Quran, they never disobey God's commands to them, but do as they are ordered. However, this life was created with God's wisdom for greater purpose to test us, preceding the eternal life of the paradise where no suffering exists. Therefore, considering God's perfect attributes of knowledge and wisdom, this world is the best world. There is no better world than this. No better world, no argument that God could create, better world than this, because this is the best world for the purpose that could exist with the facility for the testing of human free will, in which suffering also exists, but for greater divine purpose. So this is how we need to approach this, this issue of evil and suffering. Now, this life is a test. And the nature of this life, as God revealed to us, is one with purpose, and its purpose include trials and tribulations of ease and difficulty. Because, atheists keep asking, why do we need to be tested? So the trials and tribulations of this life are not aimless or without meaning, so that the human being is existentially empty or lost. Instead, God elaborates that this life is to test you, to see who is best in deeds, so that meaningful lives are lived with productivity and optimism in anticipation for the eternal afterlife. If one seeks a life with no suffering, exists, no illness, no pain, no disaster, no oppression, no calamities, no death, no injustice, nothing. But with everything perfect, you have perfect house, you have perfect spouse, you have wealth, you have health, and all other expectation, then such person will find it extremely difficult to accept the reality of this life as it is. And in fact, what he or she is seeking is the paradise, not this life, because this life, the nature of this life is different. Now, essentially, the one who becomes angry with God about this life fail to understand the nature of this life. And this is how we need to help them to understand that. One cannot choose what this life entails or not, of ease and difficulty, but ease and difficulty, they coexist in this life. And this is what Allah says in the Quran.
فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا.
Now here, some Quran commentators, they translate after difficulty comes ease. But the Quran does not say that. The Quran says that they are together. With the difficulty is ease. With the difficulty is ease. Because they are together. So life is like that. Not only that.
فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانصَبْ.
Now we are also told, when we finish one task, one difficult task, we start with another difficult task. It is not like, I'm doing this and when I'm done, I want to relax and, I want to be happy, and thereafter I want to retire and I want, no, life is not like that. When you retire, then there is no development, there's no growth, finish. Death is what will come next. Now, I want to share a story. A young man abandoned religion and the worship of God after his mother was diagnosed with cancer, and shortly thereafter passed away. Despite the young man's frequent exposure to illness in the hospital where he worked, he became angry at God for allowing his own mother to fall ill and pass away. Is the atheist suggestion that this life should include no illness and no death? Is that what they suggest? Can this world function without illness or death? And who should make such a decision? Now, going back to the story of this young man, several years into his atheism, and his anger began to subside, the question that brought him back to God was, what is your suggested alternative to illness and death? Simply, he didn't have. And thus he come to realize this life, we have to live with this because these are part of the tests. Now, there is also the significance of the free will that God has given us. The fact that humans have been given free will with a divine purpose of being tested, it compels that some will misuse it to violate the rights of other human beings, of animals, of the environments. And that's why even the angels, they knew that. Because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the angels that he's planning to place a human being with a free will on earth, immediately their reaction was, you really want to cause, want to put someone who will cause corruption therein and sheds blood? So they understood that. So the question of God's intervention has been also raised when it comes to moral evil. The essay they ask, if God exists, so why doesn't he intervene, with all these wars, with all these corruptions, with all these, suffering? Why doesn't he intervene? Now, if atheists were to request that God intervene every time moral evil is about to occur, then the test itself becomes meaningless as the free will is bypassed. If the free will exclude the ability to commit harm, then human beings will not perform good by choice, which is a primary objective of worldly existence. There is extreme subjectivity in the human perspective of this matter because of a limitation that we have with our knowledge and our wisdom about our own affairs. The afterlife is the true justice. So for those people who are really looking for true justice, they should focus on the afterlife, because the punishment and the reward on a scale beyond human comprehension, and the human free will exemplified in this world will be held into account in the next life. So this is another way of viewing evil and suffering. Now, I want to speak a little bit about the significance of eternal life. The ultimate Islamic thought to the problem of evil and suffering, of course, is that this life is not only a test, but that afterlife provides an avenue for eternal reward. Even a century of suffering in this world will be insignificant compared to an eternity life in the paradise, and the Quran speaks about that. You know, the people who have suffered here will be asked in the next life, you know, if they have suffered, if they're going to end up in the paradise, they will say, no, we didn't suffer. Once they, you know, when they know the reality of the eternal life in the paradise. So a place free of all forms of suffering and hardship. Now, the idea of eternal reward in the paradise in exchange for one human lifetime of fluctuating struggles provide consolation for many victims of moral and natural evils. Now, a person who has been abused, for example, or his rights have been transgressed, without seeing justice in this world, could not imagine an afterlife that did not consist of punishment for the perpetrators of his suffering in this life. And this is where atheists fail, because, you know, the idea of atheists that this life is all what there is, and when you die, that's the end of it, and these atrocities that have been, you know, done in this life, and injustices, and people are not accountable for, and those who suffered and have not been rewarded, it is very depressing. So likewise, victims of natural disasters such as floods, earthquakes, cyclones, and, you know, all of these, you know, they are generally considered as martyrs in Islam and in many other monotheistic religions as well. And there is a promise of reward of the paradise. So, of course, eternal reward does not justify abuse in this life or discourage believers to find solutions for the natural adversities if can relieve themselves. All right? But it does provide a consolation, you know, for the suffering that we're going through in this life. Now, why God allows evil and suffering? Now, according to Islamic thought, God allowed the existence of some evil and suffering to occur in the world for many possible reasons, but always revolves around God's infinite and unlimited knowledge and wisdom. But human beings, we have limited knowledge and limited access to the divine wisdom. But if you compare this to the atheism, under atheism, evil and suffering have no purpose. They are simply blind natural forces in the world that arbitrarily pick their prey or victims. So those who are victims of evil and suffering have no emotional, spiritual, and rational tools like what we have in Islam, for example, to help alleviate their suffering or put their experiences into perspective. An atheist could have suffered all his or her life and just ended up in the grave. And all his or her suffering and sacrifice and pain will have absolutely no meaning whatsoever. Atheists cannot and should not attribute evil and suffering to any type of will, human or divine, because everything is just reduced to blind, random, and non-rational physical occurrences. So why do they complain? Now, Islamic thought on the evil and suffering in the world, we have been given some of the reasons, okay? And I have listed here 17 of them. There are more. We need just to ponder and reflect. Now, I'm not going to read all of this, but I'm going to, just pause it for a minute for you to have a good scan of it. Just for example, one of the reasons evil and suffering is allowed, because, of course, it is to test our human beings' free will, but also for the sake of guiding one who become misguided. Because when you're put on a difficult situation, the use of carrot and stick is used in even in the worldly situation. But the stick is much more effective than the carrot, and therefore God, using the stick of evil and suffering, it works sometimes to bring people back to God, and then it could be to ward off greater harm. It could be a blessing in disguise, as in the case of the story of Sayyidina Musa and Al-Hafidh. It could be in order for believers' ranks to be increased in paradise, because it could be that your actions, your deeds cannot get you to that level that Allah wants you to, to be, and therefore, He challenges you. So all of these, we have so many of these a very important meaning of evil and suffering in this life. Now, just to ponder quickly on evil from the aspect of the divine justice. Now, there is a false comparison of the meaning of God's wisdom and human wisdom. In the case of human acts, wisdom means to perform an act to enable oneself to reach a given goal and perfection. But God's wisdom is what enables creatures and everything to reach their goals and existential perfection, because God is perfect. He doesn't need wisdom to perfect himself, because he's already perfect. And therefore his wisdom, he used his wisdom to enable creatures to reach their perfection. Also, since God is necessarily existent, he is also necessarily bountiful. So the divine bounty incorporates the entire universe. The divine bounty has antecedents and posterity and cause and effect, which cannot be contravened. So it is not possible for any being to stay back from one position and occupy another position. We need to improve ourselves to receive that bounty. The deficiency and perfections and strengths and weakness that exist among the creations is difference, is not discrimination. As atheists, they're trying to, to blame God for discrimination. It's like, the human being have capacities, and our capacity differs. If your capacity, it's like, if you take a container, a 5-liter container and 10-liter container, and you dip yourself in a sea or in a river, the bounties of God are there, unlimited. But how much can you take from it? It depends on your capacity. So the one who has 5 liters will take water 5 liters, but the one with 10 liters will take 10 liters. So these differences also, you may say, but it's God who determined these differences. These differences are innate, essential necessity for the system of cause and effect. So for the universe to work properly, you need these differences. Otherwise, if you need food, if everybody is rich, if everybody is educated, if everybody, where are we going to get your food? Who is going to serve you? Who's going to farm land, to produce food? So these are the differences that they must be there. Now, for things to come into being, it is not enough for God's causality to be complete. The potentiality of the recipient also is necessary. So we need to do some work ourselves as well. False comparison of God's action and human action. God's actions are general, not particular, and necessary, not coincidental. Because if your house is on fire, you cannot blame fire. God creates fire for humanity. So there's a interest, general interest, and there is a individual interest. Now, evil is either real, like lack of knowledge is real, but it is not created. It's not being. Sometimes God is blamed for creating poverty or for creating, illiteracy. This is not true. These are true. They are real evil, but they are non-being. It's not because they've been created. They reflect our deficiency. Now, evil also could be relative. Something which are real beings. For example, flood is real. It has been created. But flood by itself is not evil. It's only evil when it affects society negatively. It's like a poison, a snake. Is a poison evil? No, poison is not evil. Poison is important for the snake to live. It's only when snake bites a human being that poison becomes evil. So everything is relative. Now, what we need to understand, evil and good are not two separate formations. They are mixed. If not for evil and ugliness, there will be no meaning for good and beauty. If everybody is like Nabi Yusuf, then beauty will have no meaning. And ugliness also will have no meaning. So evil and ugliness manifest good and beauty, and the opposite is also true. Now, the universe is a single, indivisible unit with infinite linked parts and events. So atheists, when they ask to remove something, to remove like evil or to remove this, to remove that, removing some of its parts and keeping some of them is a false supposition. Because God has a picture view of the universe, and we have like a pixel view of the universe. So this universe, it will not function if these parts are removed. Dr. Yusuf, I have 2-3 more slides. Should I continue or should I stop?
I think for the 2 slides, we can continue. If you had more than that, I would say that we will have part 4.
Just 2 slides quickly. So this question that comes, what is the purpose of creation? All right. Atheists, they may easily become discontent by this hollow view of life, while believers never find themselves in despair because they know that the creator of this world is wise and his action undoubtedly based on wisdom. So God created us, sustains us, supports us, nourishes us, okay, and leading us from imperfections towards perfections and excellence. Our servitude towards God in our worship, prayers, and righteous deeds are training classes for leading us toward that perfection. And that is the purpose of creation. The purpose of creation is to train. These are like a living classes, because the goal is to perfect us. And therefore, the purpose of our creation is to achieve perfection and excellence for ourselves, not for God. God does not gain any benefit from us. On the contrary, he bestows benefits to us from his unlimited treasure. And sometimes they ask questions, so why did he create even the paradise? Why did he create paradise? Why did you? In this world, if somebody has a lot of resources and he doesn't use their resources for good reason, like a parent, a father is wealthy, but he suffocates his children in terms of material well-being, we blame when we say, this is not a good attitude. And God is bountiful, and He wants to use His bounty on us, and therefore this is very reasonable. Why God didn't create a perfect man? Well, this question is already answered. This objection stems from oversight of the fact that the main branch of perfection and excellence is voluntary acts, and that's why we have this free will to choose what is good and what is bad. If a human being is to be created a perfect person like an angel, it will just defeat that purpose. Why God did to test us? Well, I will just focus on the right side of this slide, and this one will give you the good meaning. For the purpose of making soldiers tough militarily. Why they make them to participate in these difficult exercises, and they subject them to various hardships such as hunger, thirst, heat, chillness, and all sort of things. Why? Because they want them, to make them, to develop them into accomplished and conditioned and proficient soldiers. And that's why God put us in these trials and tribulations of this world, where He allowed some evil and some suffering, because for the same reason, because He really wants to build us to have this strength, spiritual strength. Okay, so this ends our presentation.